Hello everyone. I'll be reporting a literary analysis of How to Tame a Wild Tongue by Gloria Anzaldúa. So, before we proceed to his works, I'll be discussing a brief history about Gloria Anzaldúa. So, Gloria Anzaldúa was born on September 26, 1942, in Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. She was the fifth of eight children in a Mexican-American family of migrant farm workers, and Anzaldo's parents were both from South Texas, but their families had roots in northern Mexico, and growing up, Anzaldo spoke Spanish at home and English in school, and she often felt caught between two cultures and languages, which we will tackle later on his work. So, Anzaldo attended Pan University, now the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, which she earned a bachelor's degree in English and Art in 1969. After graduation, she taught in the public schools of South Texas for several years before enrolling in graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin. She earned a master's degree in English and Education in 1972 and moved to California in 1977 to pursue a PhD in Literature and Linguistics at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So her doctoral dissertation completed in 1981 and was titled Towards a New Consciousness: An Analysis of Chicana Literature. This work became the foundation for a groundbreaking book which is entitled Borderlands: La Frontera, The New Mestiza, which was published in 1987. So this book is somewhat related, is related to the work I'll be discussing later. So Anzalza's work had a profound impact on Chicana or Chicano studies, feminist theory, and queer theory. She was a pioneering queer Chicana writer and theorist who challenged the dominant culture's norms and values, and advocated for a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable society. Anzalda died on May 15, 2004 in Santa Cruz, California at the age of 61. So one of her famous remarkable works, which was Borderlands: La Frontera, is a hybrid text that blends autobiography, theory, poetry, and history. The book explores Anzuela's experience growing up in the borderlands between the United States and Mexico, as well as her struggles with racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression. Anzuela coined the term borderlands to describe the space where different cultures and identities meet and clash, and she argued that this liminal space could be a site of creativity, resistance, and transformation. So, How to Tame a Wild Tongue is a chapter from Gloria Anzalda's book, Borderlands: La Frontera, The New Mestiza. In this chapter, Anzalda reflects on her experience growing up as a Chicana in the United States and the challenges she faced in navigating multiple cultural and linguistic identities. Some of the key topics she explores in the chapter includes uh, language and identity, and Zelda discusses the role of language in shaping identity and how her use of Spanish and English has been both source of pride and a point of conflict in her life. She argues that the dominant culture has historically sought to suppress and erase the languages and cultures of people of color, and that reclaiming these languages is an act of resistance and self-affirmation. So next is the borderlands. So borderlands, Anzolda introduces the concept of the borderlands as the liminal space where different cultures and identities meet and intersect. She argues that the borderlands can be a site of creative hybridity, but also a place of violence and oppression, where people are forced to negotiate multiple and often conflicting identities. So next is we have linguistic terrorism. Anzalda describes the experience of linguistic terrorism or systematic oppression of non-dominant language and cultures. She notes that people who speak English without an accent are often privileged in society, while those who speak with an accent or in a non-dominant language are marginalized and stigmatized. So next is we have code switching. So Anzalda reflects on her own use of code switching, or the ability to shift between languages and cultural codes depending on the situation. She argues that code switching is a survival strategy for people who live in the borderlands, but it can also be a source of shame and self-doubt, which is somehow I agree. So in this passage from How to Tame a Wild Tongue, Gloria Anzalda uses a dental visit as a metaphor for the way dominant culture tries to control and suppress non-dominant languages and cultures. The dentist represents the dominant culture, while Anzaldo's tongue represents her Chicana identity and her use of Spanish language. So when the dentist says we're going to control your eyes, I mean your tongue, he's not only referring to her physical tongue, but also to her Chicana identity in her use of Spanish language, which are seen as threatening and unacceptable to the dominant culture. So the dentist's efforts to clean out Anzalda's roots and cap her tooth represents the dominant culture's attempts to erase or suppress non-dominant cultures. So Anzaldo's strong and stubborn tongue represents resistance to assimilation and a refusal to be silenced or erased. She wonders how one can tame a wild tongue, train it to be quiet, or make it lie down, which suggests the impossibility of suppressing or eradicating one's cultural and linguistic identity. So overall, Anzaldo's use of this metaphor illustrates the tension and conflict between dominant and non-dominant cultures, and the resistance and resilience of those who refuse to be silenced or erased. So next slide. So in this part of the book, Gloria recalls her experience growing up as a Chicana in the United States, where speaking Spanish or having an accent was met with punishment and discrimination. Anzualda writes, I remember being caught speaking Spanish at recess. That was good for 3 licks in the knuckles with a sharp ruler. She also remembers being sent to the corner of the classroom for talking back to her Anglo teacher when she was simply trying to correct the pronunciation of her name. Anzalo's mother was also insistent that she speak English without a Mexican accent, believing that it was necessary for finding a job, and this pressure was felt not just in her personal life but also in her education. So, as a Chicano student at Pan American University, Anzolda was required to take 2 speech classes to get rid of her accent. Anzolda argues that these attacks on one forms of expression are a violation of the First Amendment, and that attempts to tame or erase a wild tongue are futile. So wild tongues can't be tamed, they can only be cut, she writes. So those previous experience he had suffered highlight the discrimination and oppression faced by many non-dominant cultures and languages in the United States. Anzualda's essay remains a powerful call for the celebration and preservation of linguistic and cultural diversity. So next is we have the overcoming the tradition of silence. This is one of the chapters of the book which I will only discuss since this part of the book is very lengthy to present. So to sum it up, uh, this chapter discusses how the tradition of silence that she was raised with as a Chicana growing up in the United States can be overcome through self-expression and embracing one's own language and culture. She notes that the pressure to assimilate to dominant Anglo-American culture often results in Chicanos and other marginalized groups feeling ashamed or embarrassed of their own language and cultural identity. So Anzaldúa encourages readers to resist this pressure and instead celebrate linguistic and cultural diversity, recognizing that language is intimately tied to one's identity and personal history. Ultimately, she argues that it is through reclaiming and affirming our own language and cultures that we can overcome the tradition of silence and assert our own voice and agency in the world. So next is the Chicano Spanish. So this chapter discusses the unique dialect of Spanish spoken by Chicanos, which she calls Chicano Spanish. She notes that this dialect incorporates words and expression from various languages, including Spanish English and indigenous languages, reflecting the complex history and cultural hybridity of Chicano communities. Anzualda argues that Chicano Spanish is a valid and valuable form of communication capable of expressing the unique experiences and perspectives of Chicanos. She also discusses how Chicano Spanish is often subject to ridicule and discrimination both from dominant Anglo-American culture and from within Chicano communities themselves. So, who may see it as a sign of lower social status or education. So, next would be chapter linguistic terrorism. So, in this chapter, he discusses the concept of linguistic terrorism, which he defined as the use of language as a tool of oppression and domination. She argues that linguistic terrorism is often directed at marginalized groups who are pressured to assimilate to dominant Anglo-American culture and abandon their own languages and cultural identities. Anzaldúa notes that linguistic terrorism takes many forms from overt discrimination and violence to subtle forms of microaggressions such as mocking or belittling accents or dialects. She also discusses the ways in which linguistic terrorism can be internalized by members of marginalized communities who may come to view their own language and cultural identity as inferior or shameful. Anzaldas encourages readers to resist linguistic terrorism by affirming their own languages and cultural identities and rejecting the pressure to assimilate to dominant culture. So, for the specific details of the literary work entitled To Tame a Wild Tongue, so the form used in the literary work is a personal essay. So, a personal essay is a short work of autobiographical nonfiction characterized by a sense of intimacy and a conversational manner. So, for its genre, it can be considered a combination of both cultural commentary and autobiographical narrative. As for its settings, it occurred in South Texas between September 26, 1942 and May 15, 2004, which is the lifespan of the author. Since since the literary work is somewhat considered a autobiographical narrative. So next, we have the point of view. So the literary work was written from a first person point of view. Anzalda writes about her own experiences and perspectives as Chicana, using I and we to refer to herself and other members of the Chicano community. The essay is deeply personal and introspective, exploring Anzalda's struggles with her identity and language as a Chicana writer and educator. This point of view allows the reader to gain insight into Anzala's thoughts and emotions and to understand the complexity of her experiences and perspectives on language, identity, and cultural assimilation. So, as for the theme of the work is more on the struggle for cultural identity and the power dynamics that exist between dominant and minority cultures. So Anzaldo writes about the experience of being Chicana, a Mexican American woman, and the challenges she faces as a bilingual and bicultural individual living in a society that values assimilation and conformity. So for its literary style, uh, there are the essay employs several literary techniques or styles to convey the author's message. Some of these techniques I was able to uh, found was first the imagery. So Anzola uses vivid imagery to describe her experiences growing up as a Chicana in the United States. For example, she describes her mouth as a mother lode and his tools as drills and long thin needles. This imagery creates a powerful visual image that helps the reader understand the physical and emotional pain of being silenced and suppressed. So next is metaphor, and she uses the metaphor of a wild tongue to represent the Chicano identity and culture. This metaphor is used throughout the essay to describe the struggles and challenges faced by Chicanos in America. As for the language, She incorporates multiple languages in her writing, including English, Spanish, and Chicano Spanish. This use of language reflects the complexity of her identity and cultural heritage and underscores the importance of embracing one's linguistic and cultural diversity. For the anecdotes, and Zoltan shares personal anecdotes from her life to illustrate the impact of linguistic terrorism and the importance of resisting assimilation. This helps the reader connect with the author's experiences and understand the urgency of her message. As for the symbolism, she uses symbols such as the ruler used to punish her for speaking Spanish in the classes which she was forced to take to eradicate her accent to represent the larger issues of oppression and discrimination faced by Chicanos in America. As for the tone of How to Tame a Wild Tongue, it is more on passionate, defiant, and introspective. Uh, She writes from a deeply personal and emotional perspective, sharing her struggles with language, identity, and cultural assimilation as a Chicano writer and educator. And she is passionate about preserving and celebrating the rich linguistic and cultural heritage of the Chicano community, and she is defiant in the face of linguistic oppression and cultural imperialism that she has experienced throughout her life. At the same time, Anzalda's tone is introspective as she reflects on her own experiences and emotions and examines the complex relationships between language, identity, and power. Overall, the tone of the essay is powerful and evocative call to action, urging readers to embrace their linguistic and cultural diversity and resist the forces to seek silence and oppress them. As for the mood of the literary work, it is a mixture of defiance, anger, and sadness. And defiance can be seen in the way Anzal challenges the notion that one language or culture is superior to another, and how she refuses to conform to linguistic and cultural assimilation. Anger is evident in the way she describes linguistic oppression and violence experienced by Chicanos in how their language and identity is constantly attacked and marginalized. Sadness is present in the way she laments the loss of language and culture and the difficulty of navigating between multiple identities. Overall, the mood is complex and reflects the emotional weight of the experiences and issues discussed in the essay. So, for analysis, in conclusion, Gloria Anzal's essay, How to Tame a Wild Tongue, emphasizes the crucial role of language in shaping a person's culture, identity, and community. Through her personal experience growing up as a bilingual Mexican American, Anzalda highlights the oppressive force that seek to erase the unique voices and culture of marginalized groups. Her account reveals the damaging effects of assimilation and the importance of preserving cultural identity and heritage. And Zolda argues that language is not just a means of communication but a tool for survival and resistance against dominant cultural pressures. She encourages us to embrace and celebrate the diverse languages and cultures that make up our society, emphasizing that cultural richness is a strength rather than a weakness. And ultimately, Anzal's essays serve as a powerful reminder of the importance of language in shaping our sense of self and the value of preserving and celebrating cultural diversity. So, if I were to relate the story from the book, as a Filipino, I can relate to Anzala's essay in terms of the importance of language in shaping our culture, identity, and community. Like Anzalda, Filipinos also have a rich history of colonization and cultural assimilation, which have greatly affected our language and cultural identity. The Philippines was colonized by Spain for over 300 years, and this has left a lasting impact on our language, religion, and customs. Similarly, the American colonization of the Philippines in the 20th century has also influenced our culture and language. Anzualda's essay also highlights the oppressive forces that seek to erase unique voices and cultures of one ago. This is also a relevant issue in the Philippines, where indigenous communities and minority groups are often marginalized and their cultures and language are not given proper recognition and respect. Anzala's call to embrace and celebrate diverse languages and culture is also applicable to the Philippines, where there are over 100 different languages and dialects spoken throughout the country. Celebrating and preserving this cultural diversity is crucial in maintaining our cultural identity and promoting social harmony. Overall, Anzaldúa's essay serves as a powerful reminder that language is not just a means of communication, and as again, it is a tool for survival and resistance against too many cultural pressures. As Filipinos, we can learn from this and strive to preserve and celebrate our diverse cultural heritage through language and other cultural expressions. So that's all for my literary analysis for How to Tame a Wild Tongue by Gloria Anzualda. And thank you for listening.